The night had moved gently toward its middle hour when Mara reached the fig house. Beyond the glass, the weather had softened the garden into pale, indistinct shapes. The lamps along the connecting walk made warm pools on the tiles, each one joining the next without quite touching it. Mara passed through them at an even pace, carrying the logbook against her side with the pencil tucked through its spine. The fig house door stood open by its usual small measure. She placed one hand on the handle and eased it wider, then stepped into the gathered warmth. The change in the air was immediate but mild. The glass house held the clean scent of damp stone, leaves, and settled soil. Broad fig leaves rose from the beds on either side of the path, their dark surfaces taking a muted green shine from the lamps. Some turned outward toward the glass. Others overlapped above the lower stems, making quiet layers of shadow. Mara paused just inside long enough for her eyes to adjust. There was no need to hurry from one object to the next. The room was already in its night state. The lamps shone evenly. The paths were dry and clear. Near the wall, the watering can stood upright on its tray. The door to the potting room was closed but unlatched, and a narrow line of warmer light showed around its frame. Tonight's work here was ordinary. Check the soil, prepare to measure the newest leaf, and leave a clear record for the next round. Mara knew the order well enough to let her hands and feet settle into it. She opened the logbook at the page marked for the fig house. There were already several short entries above the blank line, each made in the same practical spirit. Dates, conditions, small observations. Nothing in the book asked to be made more important than it was. Mara wrote the time first. Then she added, "Fig house warm. Paths dry, lamps steady." Her pencil moved with a quiet, dry sound across the paper. She read the line once, closed the book over one finger to hold the place, and walked slowly along the nearest bed. For a soil check, looking at the surface was only the beginning. Soil could appear dry where the warm air had touched it and still hold enough moisture below. Mara crouched near the edge of the bed, away from the closest stem, and rested the logbook on her knee. The top layer was loose and faintly crumbed. She moved a little of it aside with one fingertip and pressed gently beneath it. The soil below felt cooler. When she lifted her hand, a small trace of dark earth remained against her finger, neither muddy nor dusty. She checked again a short distance, farther along the edge. The same coolness waited beneath the surface there. The bed had moisture enough for the moment. It did not need water simply because watering was one of the possible tasks on the round. Care also meant leaving a plant alone when its condition was already suitable. Mara brushed the loose soil back into place. She did not pack it down. A light movement of her fingers was enough to return the surface to the way she had found it. She stood, keeping her pace easy, and crossed to the watering can. It remained on its tray, ready if required. She touched the handle to confirm its position, then left it there. At the far side of the room, one of the younger fig plants grew in the long bed near the potting room door. Its leaves were smaller than those of the older plants, and more of its slender stem remained visible between them. A small wooden marker stood in the soil nearby. Mara noticed the marker as she approached, though she did not stop to read it closely yet. That could wait until she was ready to make the leaf measurement itself. For now, she looked at the ground around the plant without touching the stem or leaves. The surface was tidy. No soil had spilled onto the path. The space around the marker was clear enough for her to kneel later and set a rule beside the leaf without brushing against the neighboring growth. She opened the logbook again and completed the entry she had begun. General bed check, cool beneath surface. No watering now. It was a specific record, but not a complicated one. Anyone reading it later would know what she had checked, what she had found, and why the watering can had remained on its tray. Mara closed the book and turned toward the potting room. The door opened easily beneath her hand. Warm amber light spread across the threshold and joined the greener light of the fig house. Inside, the work table ran beneath the inner window. Stacked clay pots stood at one end. A brush rested with its bristles turned upward in a jar. A tray of plant labels sat near a shallow bin of dry potting mix. Everything had the settled appearance of tools waiting between uses. Mara placed the logbook on the clear part of the table and laid the pencil beside it. She did not need to search for anything hurriedly. The potting room had its own simple arrangement, and the objects most often used for fig house work were kept close to the connecting door. She looked first at the work surface. It was dry. A light scattering of potting mix lay near the bin, no more than a few grains. Mara drew them together with the side of one finger and returned them to the bin. Then she wiped the place with the folded cloth already resting near the table's edge. The movement took only a moment. When she had finished, the table was ready to hold the logbook open while she recorded a measurement. The wooden measuring rule rested on the small shelf beside the door to the fig house. It was plain, with dark marks that could be read easily under the lamp. Mara lifted it from the shelf and checked that no dry soil clung to either edge. She ran the cloth lightly along its length, then set it on the table parallel to the logbook. She would use it beside the leaf rather than against it. A young leaf did not need to be pressed flat or handled for a simple measurement. The rule only needed to be held steadily from the base toward the tip, close enough for the marks to be read. Mara opened the logbook once more. Beneath the soil entry, she left space for the length and the condition of the new leaf. She made a small pencil mark at the beginning of the next line, then stopped. The number belonged there only after she had measured it. For the moment, preparation was enough. She returned the folded cloth to the edge of the work table. The pencil went back through the spine of the logbook. She picked up the book with one hand and the wooden rule with the other, holding both comfortably rather than balancing them in a single awkward bundle. From the potting room doorway, she could see the young fig plant across the short stretch of clear path. The nearby lamp gave its leaves a soft green outline. The wooden marker remained beside it, waiting to be read when she began the closer inspection. Behind her, the clay pots stayed in their neat stacks. The brush remained upright in its jar. The shallow bin was closed, and the work table was clear except for the place where the logbook had rested. Mara switched off nothing and moved nothing else. The potting room lamp was part of the established night arrangement, useful for seeing the marks on the rule and making a legible entry. She left the door open between the two rooms so the light fell gently across the threshold. Back in the fig house, the warmth settled around her again. The soil beds were quiet and suitably moist beneath their loose upper layer. The watering can remained on its tray because it was not needed. Her first entry was complete, and the materials for the leaf measurement were ready in her hands. Mara walked toward the young plant at the same unhurried pace with which she had entered. At the edge of the bed, she lowered the logbook to a dry place beside her and rested the wooden rule across its closed cover. Then she looked once around the warm room. Clear path, steady lamps, broad leaves holding their quiet shapes beneath the glass. The arrival round had found everything in order. The soil had been checked, the decision not to water had been recorded, and the next small task had been prepared without disturbing the plant. Mara settled beside the bed, ready to look more closely at the leaf. Mara settled beside the long bed with the logbook on the dry path and the wooden rule resting across its closed cover. The young fig stood a little apart from the older plants, close to the potting room door where the amber light reached through the open frame. From this height, she could see the plant more clearly. Its stem was slender and pale beneath the leaves. Two older leaves spread outward, one toward the path and one toward the glass. Near the top, a newer leaf had begun to open. It was smaller than the others, and still held a few soft folds along its edges, as though it had not yet finished arranging itself in the warm air. Mara did not touch it. She first looked at the space around the plant, making sure she could work without leaning against the neighboring stems. The path was wide enough. The loose upper soil had already been returned to place after her earlier check. The small wooden marker stood beside the plant, its faded writing turned slightly away from her. For now, she left the marker as it was. The condition of the plant came first. Mara lifted the rule from the logbook and held it loosely in one hand. Before bringing it near the leaf, she studied the point where the leaf joined the stem and followed its shape with her eyes toward the tip. That gave her a clear line to measure without moving the leaf itself. She shifted a little closer on one knee. The rule remained beside the leaf rather than beneath it. Mara lined the first mark, near the base, leaving a small space between wood and plant. The newer leaf curved slightly forward, so she adjusted the angle of the rule until both edges could be seen at once under the lamp. Then she read the length. It was just over 6 inches from base to tip. Mara held the rule steady for another moment, not because the measurement was difficult, but because there was no reason to rush it. The marks were dark and clear against the pale wood. The leaf stayed still in the warm room, its fine veins visible beneath the softened green light. She lowered the rule and looked again from the same position. The leaf was open enough to measure, though its edges had not yet fully relaxed. Its surface was softer and less glossy than the broad leaves around it. Nothing appeared strained or disturbed. The stem held it easily. Mara set the rule across the closed logbook again. The earlier soil check had covered the general bed, but she now checked the edge nearest this particular plant. She chose a place well away from the stem and moved aside the loose top layer with one fingertip. Beneath it, the soil was cool and dark, just as it had been farther along the bed. She pressed gently, then lifted her hand. A faint trace of earth remained on the pad of her finger. It held together for a moment before crumbling. There was moisture beneath the warm surface, but no excess water and no need to add more. Mara checked a second place along the outer edge of the bed. The result was the same. She returned the soil with 2 light movements, leaving it loose. The watering can could remain on its tray. Its upright shape was visible across the path, ready for another time when it was needed. Mara brushed the trace of soil from her finger over the bed, then picked up the logbook. She opened it to the waiting line beneath her first entry and tucked the pencil from the spine. Resting the book on her knee, she wrote slowly enough for the words and figures to remain clear. Young fig. Soil cool beneath surface. No water. On the next line, she recorded the measurement. New leaf just over 6 inches. The pencil made its quiet, dry sound against the paper. Mara paused at the end of the line and checked the figure against what she had seen. It was simple and exact enough. She added no guess about what the leaf might do next. The logbook was most useful when it held what had been observed rather than what might later happen. She closed the book over one finger and looked once more at the plant. The small wooden marker remained beside it. In the light from the potting room, she could see that it carried a few lines of faded handwriting. But the marker was angled toward the bed rather than the path. She would turn her attention to it after the inspection was put away. There was no need to combine every small part of the work into a single moment. Mara lifted the rule and stood. She carried it through the open doorway into the potting room, with the logbook held comfortably against her side. The amber lamp gave the plain wooden marks a warmer color. On the work table, the stacked clay pots remained. At one end, the brush stood bristles up in its jar, and the tray of plant labels lay beside the closed bin of dry potting mix. She placed the logbook on the clear part of the table and laid the rule beside it. A faint grain of soil clung near the lower edge of the rule. Mara picked up the folded cloth and drew it once along the wood, then turned the rule and wiped the other side. She did not polish it or make unnecessary work of it. The object only needed to be clean before it returned to the shelf. When the edge was clear, she carried the rule to its place beside the fig house door. She set it parallel to the front of the shelf, where it could be lifted easily on the next round. The folded cloth went back to the work table. Mara checked the place where the logbook had rested. It was dry and clean. Nothing from the inspection needed sweeping, and none of the stacked pots had been moved. She opened the book once more beneath the potting room lamp. The two new lines followed naturally from the earlier entry. The beds held enough moisture, the watering can had stayed on its tray, and the young leaf had been measured without being handled. Mara read the page from the time at the top to the final figure. Anyone taking the next shift would understand the condition of the room and what had been done. She returned the pencil to the spine. For a few moments she stood at the inner window between the potting room and the fig house. The warmer amber light met the muted green of the lamps beyond. Broad leaves overlapped in quiet layers, and the clear path ran between the beds toward the glasshouse door. The young fig was partly hidden from this angle. Mara could still see the upper edge of the new leaf, held among the older growth. The wooden marker made a narrow shape in the soil beside it. She picked up the logbook and stepped back through the doorway. The fig house felt unchanged by the inspection. Its warmth remained even. The clean scent of damp stone and leaves rested in the air. The watering can stood where it had before, and the soil showed no sign of the light checks made along its outer edge. Mara crossed the short path to the young plant and stopped beside it. The first inspection was complete. The soil had been checked. The choice not to water had been recorded, and the new leaf had a clear measurement in the logbook. The wooden rule was clean and back on its shelf. The potting room table was ready for its next ordinary use. Only the small marker remained to be read more closely. Mara lowered herself beside the bed again, with the closed logbook resting easily in her hand. The lamps stayed steady above her, and the warm fig house held its quiet night arrangement, while she turned her attention to the faded writing beside the leaf. Mara remained beside the young fig, with the closed logbook resting easily in her hand. The inspection was complete, and only the small wooden marker remained to be read more closely. Its faded writing faced slightly toward the bed. She leaned nearer without reaching between the stems. Under the muted green lamp and the warmer light coming through the potting room doorway, she could make out the shape of several handwritten words. Though a thin veil of loose soil still covered the lower part of the marker. Mara brushed the soil aside with the edge of one finger. The wood beneath was pale where it had been sheltered and darker along its weathered grain. The handwriting was neat, practical, and faint enough that she read it slowly. New leaf expected after evening warmth. A date from earlier in the week appeared below the words, followed by Elias's initials. Mara looked from the marker to the plant. The newest leaf rested near the top of the slender stem, open among the older growth. Its edges still held a few shallow folds, and its green was softer than the deeper, broader leaves around it. She had already observed its condition and entered its length in the logbook. Now the marker gave that ordinary observation a little context. The leaf had opened as the earlier note predicted. There was nothing puzzling in the connection. The fig house had kept its even warmth through the evening, and the young plant had responded in its own time. So Elias had noticed the leaf approaching that stage during an earlier round and had left a short expectation beside it. Mara had arrived later and found the expected change complete. The accuracy pleased her in a quiet way. It was the same kind of satisfaction as finding a tool on its proper shelf or reading a clear entry from the previous shift. One careful observation had been left for another careful observer. The marker did not ask for a reply, and the leaf did not need to become an event. The earlier note and the present condition simply met beside the bed. Mara opened the logbook to the fig house page. The existing entries were concise beneath the time at the top. They already held the room's condition and the work she had completed. She found the open space beneath them, set the pencil to the paper, and added a single sentence. Leaf open as expected after evening warmth. The pencil made its soft, dry sound. Mara placed a full stop at the end and read the sentence once. It recorded the connection clearly, without enlarging it, and without repeating anything already written on the page. She turned the pencil to the spine and closed the logbook. For a moment she stayed where she was, looking at the faded marker and the new leaf above it. Seen together, they made a small record in two parts. The marker belonged to the earlier part of the week, when the leaf had still been folded more closely. The open leaf belonged to this middle portion of the night. Neither part required guessing about what would happen next. The warm room had been enough. Mara rested the logbook against her knee and let her attention widen from the young plant to the bed around it. Older leaves spread on either side, some facing the glass and others turning toward the lamps. Their surfaces held the light differently. One showed a muted shine along its center vein. Another remained almost entirely dark, where it overlapped its neighbor. The newest leaf was easy to distinguish only because Mara knew where to look. Soon, it would settle into the general green of the plant. Its edges would relax, its color would deepen, and someone entering on another night might see it first as simply one leaf among many. That did not lessen the value of noticing it now. The conservatory's overnight records were made from changes of this scale. A surface becoming dry, a lamp holding its warmth, a stem standing a little taller, a leaf opening when the conditions suited it. Nothing had to happen quickly to be worth recording. The potting room remained open behind her. Amber light lay across the threshold and reached the stone path near the bed. From where she knelt, Mara could see the clear section of the work table beneath the inner window. The stacked clay pots stood at one end. The brush waited with its bristles upward in the jar, and the tray of plant labels remained beside the shallow bin of dry potting mix. The room looked ready for the small acts that followed observation. Putting a surface back in order, returning an object to its place, leaving a note legible for the next round. Mara glanced at the wooden marker again. The soil she had brushed from its face had fallen in a narrow line beside it. Only a little had moved, but the lighter grains now rested unevenly against the darker surface of the bed. The marker itself still leaned slightly inward, secure but not easily read from the path. Those were ordinary things she could set right. She did not begin immediately. She allowed the discovery to settle first, as simple as it was. Elias's earlier handwriting remained on the wood. Mara's present sentence rested in the closed logbook. Between them stood the plant itself, requiring no explanation and making no demand. Warm air gathered beneath the glass. It carried the familiar scent of settled soil, leaves, and damp stone. Beyond the panes, the weather softened the garden into pale shapes, but here the lamps remained steady and the room's arrangement stayed plain. The path was dry. The potting room doorway was close. The young fig held its open leaf without movement. Mara rose carefully, keeping clear of the stem. From standing height, the marker became less legible again. Its face was turned too far toward the bed, and the faded words slipped into the green shadow beneath the leaves. She could understand why she had noticed it earlier without reading it. It had been placed near the plant as a practical reminder, but time and loose soil had made it less convenient to see. She considered the shortest useful work. The marker could be turned slightly toward the path without being removed. The narrow line of disturbed soil could be returned to an even, loose surface. In the potting room, she could make sure the clear table and nearby shelf were ready before leaving the area settled for the rest of the hour. None of this changed the discovery. It only followed from having paused long enough to read what was already there. Mara held the logbook comfortably against her side and looked once more at the newest leaf. Its small folds cast fine shadows near the edges. The lamp gave its veins a pale outline, while the older leaves around it formed a darker, sheltering layer. The earlier note had been right. She had recorded that connection once, and there was no need to return to it in different words. Now the page could remain closed. Mara lowered her gaze to the few displaced grains around the marker. She set the logbook on a dry place at the edge of the path, within easy reach and well away from the soil. Then she crouched beside the bed again, leaving comfortable space between herself and the young stem. The fig house remained warm and quiet around her. The potting room waited only a few steps away, its amber light falling across the clear threshold. With the small discovery complete, Mara turned her attention to the gentle work of leaving the marker, the bed, and the nearby work area ready for whoever came next. Mara remained crouched beside the young fig, with the logbook resting on a dry place at the edge of the path. The small discovery was complete. Elias's faded note had predicted that evening warmth would help the new leaf open, and the leaf had opened. Mara had measured it at just over 6 inches. The soil beneath the loose surface was cool and dark, so the plant did not need water. All of that was known now. What remained was the gentle work of leaving the plant and its records ready for the next person. The soil around the wooden marker had been lightly disturbed when Mara brushed its face, clear enough to read the faded writing. A narrow line of displaced grains rested beside it, and a little of the darker earth beneath showed through the loose upper layer. Mara drew the soil back with 2 fingers. The upper crumbs were warm and dry against her skin, much lighter than the cooler earth below. Some were fine as sand, others held together in small, soft pieces that broke apart with almost no pressure. She moved them gently around the base of the marker, covering the narrow line without pressing the surface flat. The young fig needed air around its roots, as much as it needed moisture. There was no reason to smooth the bed until it looked firm and finished. A loose surface was the better finish. She lifted her hand and looked at the result. The soil lay evenly again, with the same faintly crumbed texture as the rest of the bed. No dark lower soil remained exposed to the warm air. A few grains had reached the pale stone border beside the path. Mara gathered them with the side of her finger and returned them to the bed. Once they were back among the darker earth, the edge looked clear without appearing newly scrubbed or arranged. The wooden marker still leaned slightly toward the bed. Its writing could be read only by kneeling and looking from the side. Mara rested 2 fingers near its lower edge and tested it with the lightest pressure. It was secure in the soil. Nothing needed replacing. She turned it only a little, just enough for the faded words to face the path. New leaf expected after evening warmth. The date and Elias's initials remained below. The prediction had already done its work. It had guided Mara's attention toward an ordinary change that might otherwise have blended into the green of the room. She left the marker standing beside the plant, now easier for the next round to read without anyone reaching between the leaves. The leaf itself needed no adjustment. Mara looked at it once from base to tip. Its soft folds remained along the edges, and its fine veins showed where the lamp touched the matte green surface. She did not test those folds with her fingers or try to open them farther. Warmth and time had brought the leaf this far. Warmth and time could continue the work. Mara stood and brushed the last dry trace of soil from her fingertips over the bed. Across the path, the watering can remained upright on its tray. She left it there. The open potting room doorway was only a few steps away. Amber light spread across the threshold and met the quieter green light of the fig house. On the small shelf beside the doorway, the wooden measuring rule lay clean and dry, parallel with the front edge, exactly where Mara had returned it after measuring the leaf. There was no reason to take it down again. Inside the potting room, the stacked clay pot stood at one end of the work table. The brush rested bristles up in its jar. The tray of plant labels remained beside the shallow bin of dry potting mix, and the folded cloth lay at the clear edge of the table along its familiar creases. The room was already ready for its next ordinary use. Mara picked up the logbook from the edge of the path and carried it through the open doorway. She set it beneath the amber lamp and opened it to the fig house page. The useful facts were already there. The fig house was warm, the paths were dry, and the lamps were steady. The soil was cool beneath the surface, so no water was needed. The new leaf measured just over 6 inches. Beneath those lines, Mara had recorded the connection she had just discovered. Leaf open as expected after evening warmth. She read the page once before adding anything. There was no need to describe the same observation in several different ways. A clear log was better than a crowded one. The marker had been turned only slightly, and the displaced soil had simply been returned to its former loose condition. Both actions could fit into one concise entry. Mara drew the pencil from the spine and wrote beneath the existing lines. Soil restored loose, marker turned toward path. Her pencil moved steadily over the paper with its dry, companionable sound. She paused at the full stop, then read the entry once. It said what she had done. It did not repeat the measurement or the soil condition. It did not make the opened leaf seem more unusual than it was. Anyone reading the page later would know that the bed had been left loose and the existing marker made easier to see. Mara returned the pencil to the spine and closed the logbook. Through the inner window, the fig house held its quiet green light. Broad leaves overlapped above the beds. The young leaf was visible only as a softer shape among them. Near its stem, the wooden marker now faced outward, and the soil around it lay loose and even. The work had required very little. A few grains returned to place. A small marker turned within the soil. One short line entered in the book. That was enough. Mara stepped back through the open doorway, with the closed logbook held comfortably against her side. The gathered warmth met her hands and face again, carrying the clean scent of damp stone, leaves, and settled soil. She walked once along the edge of the bed, looking at the pale stone border and the clear path. Nothing had been left behind. The measuring rule remained clean on its shelf. The watering can had not been moved because the soil did not need water. The marker could now be read from the path, and the top layer of the bed retained its light, crumbed texture. At the young plant, Mara stopped without crouching again. From standing height, the faded words were easier to make out. The marker no longer turned inward beneath the leaves. It faced the person making the next round, while remaining close to the plant it described. Above it, the new leaf rested among the older growth. From the path, it looked smaller than it had during the close inspection. Its newest green blended softly with the deeper shades around it. It no longer seemed like a discovery waiting to be understood. The earlier note had predicted an ordinary change, and the ordinary change had come. Mara had observed it, measured it, and recorded it. Nothing more was required of the leaf. She let her gaze move from the soft folds along its edges to the slender stem, then down to the marker and the restored soil. Each part of the small task now sat in useful order. The plant had been left untouched. The bed had been returned to the condition in which she had found it. The note remained beside the leaf, turned only enough to be legible. The practical care was complete. Warm air rested beneath the glass. Outside, the softened weather remained beyond the panes, pale and distant. Inside, the lamps gave the fig leaves their muted shine. One broad leaf caught a narrow line of light along its center vein. Another stayed almost dark where it overlapped its neighbor. The new leaf held a gentler shade between them. Mara stood for another quiet moment, allowing the room to remain as it was. There was no need to check the soil again. Its condition was known. There was no need to measure the leaf again. The rule was clean and stored. There was no need to adjust the marker again. It was secure and facing the path. The concise entry waited in the closed logbook, ready for whoever next needed it. Mara placed the book against her side and turned her attention toward the few familiar steps between the bed and the potting room doorway. Amber light still crossed the clear threshold. The watering can remained upright on its tray. The wooden rule stayed on its shelf, easy to find without moving any other object. Behind her, the young fig stood in loose, evenly restored soil. Its marker faced outward. Its newest leaf remained open in the steady warmth. With the gentle work complete, Mara was ready to follow the familiar return path. Mara stood at the edge of the young fig's bed, with the closed logbook held against her side. The gentle work was complete. Loose soil lay evenly around the wooden marker. The marker faced the path, and the new leaf rested above it without having been touched. The return path began only a few steps away. From the young plant, Mara walked along the dry stone border toward the open potting room door. The amber light inside spread across the threshold, making a soft rectangle on the fig house path. To her left, the older leaves overlapped in broad, quiet layers. To her right, the watering can stood upright on its tray, still unused because the soil beneath the surface had been cool and dark. She paused beside it long enough to check that its base sat fully within the tray. It did. The handle leaned toward the path where it could be lifted easily on another round. Nothing needed changing. Mara continued to the potting room. The wooden measuring rule rested on the small shelf beside the doorway, parallel with the front edge. Beneath the amber lamp, its dark marks were clear against the pale wood. The folded cloth lay on the work table along its existing creases. The brush remained bristles up in its jar. The clay pots stayed in their neat stacks, and the lid of the shallow bin sat properly in place. She set the logbook on the clear part of the table. Before doing anything else, Mara opened the book to the fig house page and read the entry from the beginning. The time appeared first. Beneath it were the conditions she had observed when she arrived. The fig house was warm, the paths were dry, and the lamps were steady. The next line held the general bed check. The soil was cool beneath the surface. No watering now. After that came the closer check beside the young fig. Its soil was cool beneath the surface too. No water. Then came the measurement of the newest leaf, just over 6 inches. The following sentence connected the open leaf with the earlier note on the marker. Leaf open as expected after evening warmth. Last came the brief record of the gentle work she had just completed. Soil restored loose, marker turned toward path. Mara looked through the open doorway toward the young fig. From the work table, she could see the upper part of the slender stem and the softer green of the new leaf among the older growth. She could also see the narrow face of the wooden marker, now that it had been turned toward the path. The written record agreed with what remained before her. The leaf was open. Its measurement had been entered clearly. The soil beside the plant had been cool and dark beneath the surface, so the watering can remained unused. The few grains displaced while reading the marker had been returned, and the surface had been left loose. The marker faced outward. There was nothing to correct and no new fact to add. Mara read the final line once more, then closed the book without drawing the pencil from its spine. She left the date and Elias's initials on the marker to speak for themselves. They were already part of the plant's ordinary record, and there was no need to copy them into the logbook. The wooden rule was already clean, but she checked its position as she passed the shelf. One end had settled a little nearer the wall than the other. She moved it by less than the width of a finger until it lay straight and easy to reach. Then she left it alone. On the work table, the folded cloth remained ready for another use. Mara ran one hand lightly over the clear space where the logbook had rested. The surface was dry. No soil grains caught beneath her fingertips. She carried the closed book back through the doorway into the fig house. The change in light was gentle. Amber remained behind her in the potting room, while the fig house lamps gave the beds their muted green shine. The warmth felt even across her hands and face. Beyond the panes, the softened weather made the garden pale and indistinct. But inside the glass, the path was plain. From the potting room threshold, Mara followed the same short route back to the young plant. First came the small shelf with the measuring rule. Then the watering can on its tray. Then the pale stone edge of the long bed. The marker stood a little way beyond, and above it the new leaf held its quiet shape. The route had a clear order. No other room was needed, and no longer circuit was required. Everything connected with the task was contained within these few familiar steps. Mara stopped beside the bed and opened the logbook once more. Using its cover to shield the page from the slight green cast of the lamp, she read the final entries while standing near the plant itself. New leaf, just over 6 inches. Leaf open as expected after evening warmth. Soil restored loose. Marker turned toward path. She looked from the words to the leaf. The wooden rule had shown the length without touching the plant. The marker now made the earlier note easy to read. The soil remained cool beneath its loose upper layer, so the watering can had stayed on the tray. Each part of the record could be seen in the settled room around her. Mara closed the book without adding anything. Near the inner side of the potting room doorway, a clear section of the fig house shelf stood at a comfortable height above the path. Mara placed the logbook there, with its spine facing outward. She drew the pencil from the spine and set it beside the book, rather than leaving it between the pages. Both would remain within the fig house, close to the plant and close to the measuring rule, ready for the next ordinary check. She adjusted the pencil until it could not roll. The shelf was dry, and neither the book nor the pencil crowded the rule's place inside the potting room doorway. With the tools settled, Mara walked once more along the stone edge of the bed. She did not repeat the soil check. The result had already been clear. She did not measure the leaf again. The number had been recorded. She simply looked at the surface of the bed, the outward-facing marker, and the open leaf above it. The plant needed no further attention in this hour. At the far end of the short path, Mara turned back. The fig house arranged itself into familiar parts. Broad older leaves near the glass, the younger plant by the inner doorway, the watering can resting unused, and the potting room glowing amber beyond. The logbook lay closed on the fig house shelf, with the pencil beside it. The wooden rule was clean and returned to its place. The earlier note had predicted an ordinary change, and the ordinary change had come. Mara had seen it, measured it, checked the soil, and left a clear record. Nothing remained uncertain, and nothing had been set aside for later explanation. She eased the potting room door toward its usual open position, leaving enough space for the warm light to cross the threshold. Then she rested her hand briefly on the fig house door and confirmed that it, too, stood open by its familiar small measure. Warm air stayed gathered around the beds. The lamps remained steady. Outside, the pale weather rested against the panes without altering the quiet within. Mara's return path ended where it had begun, beside the young fig. She gave the new leaf one final, unhurried glance. It was no longer a discovery. It was simply part of the plant now, open among the older leaves and recorded in the book nearby. With the tools put away and the observation complete, Mara let the room settle around the finished work. The fig house stayed warm. The path remained clear. and everything needed for the next ordinary round waited in its proper place. Mara remained beside the young fig while the room settled around the completed work. There was nowhere else she needed to go just yet. The return path had already brought her back to the plant, and every part of the task was finished. The soil had been checked. The new leaf had been measured at just over 6 inches. The faded note had proved accurate, and the result had been entered in the logbook. The watering can had remained on its tray because the earth beneath the loose surface was cool and dark. The fig house stayed warm. Mara stood without reaching for the leaf again. Its softer green was easy to distinguish from the older leaves when she knew where to look. The edges still held a few shallow folds, and the fine veins showed wherever the steady lamp rested on them. Nothing about it needed correcting. It had opened in the evening warmth, and it could continue to unfold at its own quiet pace. Below it, the wooden marker faced the path. New leaf expected after evening warmth. The words were faint, but they could now be read without leaning between the stems. The date and Elias's initials remained beneath them. Mara had already recorded the useful result in the logbook, so the marker and the page agreed with each other. One held the earlier expectation. The other held the ordinary outcome. She let her gaze move down from the marker to the soil. The surface lay loose around the young plant. Small crumbs of dry earth caught a little light along their upper edges, while the deeper color beneath remained mostly hidden. The places she had checked no longer stood out from the rest of the bed. She had returned the soil lightly, without pressing it flat, and the bed looked much as it had when she arrived. There was no reason to test it again. Mara had learned that a completed check could be left complete. Repeating it would not make the record clearer or the plant better cared for. The useful thing now was to allow the soil to keep its moisture and the leaf to keep its warmth. Across the path, the watering can stood upright within its tray. Its handle leaned toward the open space where it could be reached on another round. The metal held a dim reflection from the lamp, no brighter than a narrow line along one side. Mara looked at it, confirmed its place, and left it alone. The logbook rested on the clear section of the fig house shelf near the potting room doorway. Its spine faced outward. The pencil lay beside it, adjusted so it could not roll. Both were close to the plant, the marker and the measuring rule, ready whenever the next ordinary observation was due. Mara walked the few steps from the bed to the shelf. Her pace was slow, though not because she was tired or uncertain. The work simply required no speed. The pale stone border remained on one side of her, and the clear path remained beneath her feet. Broad leaves rose from the older plants on the other side, overlapping without closing the way. At the shelf, she placed 2 fingers lightly against the logbook cover. It was closed properly. No loose page projected from the edge, and the pencil remained still beside it. Mara did not reopen the book. The entries had already been read and checked against the room. Young fig, soil cool beneath surface. No water, new leaf just over 6 inches. Leaf open as expected after evening warmth. Soil restored loose, marker turned toward path. The words held everything that needed to be carried forward. First came the soil and measurement observations, then the expected opening of the leaf, and then the later work that had restored the soil and turned the marker. They did not ask for an explanation, and they did not create another task. They were simply a clear account of the plant as it was tonight, and the care that had already been completed. Mara removed her hand from the cover. Through the open potting room door, the amber lamp rested over the work table. The wooden rule lay straight on its small shelf, parallel with the front edge. Its pale surface was clean, and the dark measuring marks were easy to see. The folded cloth remained on the table along its old creases. Beyond it, the clay pots stood in neat stacks. The brush weighted bristles up in its jar, and the shallow bin of potting mix was closed. Nothing had been left in the middle of use. Mara stepped only as far as the threshold. The potting room carried the dry, familiar scents of clay, cloth, and potting mix. They met the damp green scent of the fig house in the open doorway. The two kinds of warmth were slightly different. Under the amber lamp, the smaller room felt close and practical. Beyond it, the fig house held warmth more broadly beneath the glass, spreading it over beds, leaves, stone, and the clear path. Mara rested one hand against the doorframe and looked at the work table. Its open space was dry. The few grains of potting mix had been returned to the bin. The cloth had cleaned the wooden rule and then gone back to its place. No pot had been moved, and the brush had not been needed. She did not enter farther. The room was ready. The tools were ready. There was no small improvement left waiting to be made. Mara eased her hand from the frame and remained on the fig house side of the threshold. The door stood at its usual opening, wide enough for the amber light to cross the path without releasing too much of the room's gathered warmth. She left it exactly there. For a while, she watched the two colors of light meet on the stone. The amber from the potting room reached a little way into the muted green of the fig house. Neither light changed the other completely. Along the edge of the threshold, they made a softer shade between them, warm enough to show the clean floor and the lower edges of the nearest leaves. Outside the glass, the weather had reduced the garden to pale shapes. The panes held it at a comfortable distance. There was no need to study it or decide what it might do later. It was simply the night beyond the conservatory, softened against the glass. Inside, the temperature remained even. Mara turned from the doorway and looked along the short path to the young fig. From here, the newest leaf was partly sheltered by an older one. Its outline still showed under the lamp, a small open shape near the top of the slender stem. The marker below it faced outward, and the surface of the bed remained loose. She walked back to the plant once, not as another circuit and not to repeat the inspection, but to settle at the place where the work had ended. Her steps made little sound on the dry path. The broad leaves held still around her. Their surfaces took the light differently as she passed. Some almost matte, some showing a muted shine, others remaining dark where they overlapped. At the bed, Mara stopped at a comfortable distance. She kept her hands at her sides. There was nothing to lift, adjust, measure, or record. The simple sequence of the round had reached its final part. Set down and leave in peace. The leaf was open. The soil held enough moisture. The logbook was complete. The warmth continued. Mara allowed each fact to remain as plain as it was. Earlier, the leaf had been something to notice closely. She had aligned the wooden rule beside it without touching the plant, read the marks, and checked the length twice. Then it had become something to record. The soil and measurement observations had taken their places on the page. The sentence about the leaf opening as expected had followed them. Later, she had returned the disturbed soil, turned the marker toward the path, cleaned the rule, and entered that completed work after the observation. Now the leaf required only time. The room supplied that without effort. Warm air rested beneath the glass. The lamp stayed steady above the beds. The watering can waited unused. The older leaves stood around the young plant, broad and settled, while the new one held its place among them. Mara looked at the stone border near her feet. Its pale surface was clear of soil. Beyond it, the path ran a short distance toward the fig house door, which remained open by its familiar small measure. She had already confirmed its position. She did not need to cross the room to confirm it again. The night round would continue in its own time, with other ordinary checks belonging to their proper hours. Nothing in the fig house pulled her forward. Nothing had been left unresolved behind her. She breathed in the clean scent of leaves and damp stone. The warmth softened the backs of her hands. It had been present when she entered, when she first tested the soil, when she brought the rule beside the leaf, and when she recorded the leaf's expected opening. It remained while she restored the loose soil and turned the marker, and it remained now that the work was done. The warmth was not a discovery or a change. It was the steady condition that allowed the room's plants to pass comfortably through the night. Mara's attention returned to the new leaf. Under the lamp, the faint folds at its edges made shallow lines of shadow. The surface between the veins looked soft. Its tip pointed outward from the stem, neither drooping nor pressed against another leaf. Just over 6 inches from base to tip, it had opened exactly as the earlier note had expected. That was enough to know. Mara did not imagine how large it might become or when another leaf might follow. Those things could be observed when they happened. Tonight's page belonged to tonight's condition, and tonight's condition was settled. After a little while, she lowered her gaze to the marker and then to the soil beneath it. The 3 parts of the task rested together: the note, the plant, and the earth that held it. Nearby, the closed logbook held the same simple sequence in words: the soil and measurement observed, the leaf open as expected, and the marker and soil left in order afterward. The room grew no emptier when Mara stopped working. It remained full of ordinary continuance. Soil kept its coolness beneath the surface. Leaves held warmth gathered from the air. Lamps gave enough light for the paths and labels. Tools waited where hands could find them. Care did not always end with a final movement. Sometimes it ended with the decision to make no more movements at all. Mara stood quietly beside the bed until even the memory of the pencil's dry sound seemed to belong to an earlier part of the hour. Then she shifted her weight into a comfortable stance and looked once across the fig house. The potting room doorway still glowed amber. The wooden rule rested clean on its shelf. The folded cloth lay on the work table. The watering can stood within its tray. The logbook remained closed on the fig house shelf, its pencil secure beside it. The paths were dry, the lamps were steady, and the beds held their quiet layers of green. Her final glance returned to the young plant. The outward-facing marker stood in loose soil. Above it, among the broad older leaves, the new fig leaf rested open in the steady warmth. Mara left everything exactly so.